If Solon is praised as the father of Athenian democracy, why did Athens remain unequal and unstable after his reforms? What exactly was missing, and why didn't democracy arrive when the laws changed? This script solves the mystery between reform and reality. Why political change didn't immediately mean democratic power. In ancient Athens, one man was trusted to save the city from collapse. His name was Solon, a lawmaker remembered as a champion of justice and balance. He abolished debt, slavery, rewrote laws, and promised fairness. Yet here's the puzzle. Athens did not become a democracy after Solon. So today, we investigate a historical mystery. Why didn't democracy arrive immediately after the Solonian reforms? Imagine waking up in ancient Athens and realizing that your freedom no longer belongs to you. Not because you committed a crime, not because you lost a war, but because you failed to repay a loan. This was not a rare nightmare, it was daily life for thousands of Athenians in the early 6th century BCE. Before Solon ever entered the political stage, Athens was a city simmering with anger, fear, and inequality. And understanding this chaos is the key to understanding everything that followed. At this time, Athens was technically not ruled by a king. Power rested in the hands of aristocratic families known as the Eupatridae, the well-born. These elites controlled land, wealth, religion, and law. Ordinary citizens, especially small farmers, were trapped in a harsh economic system that favored the rich at every turn. Farming was the backbone of Athenian life. But unpredictable harvests and high-interest loans meant that a single bad year could destroy a family. When farmers failed to repay their debts, they didn't just lose money, they lost their land. Worse still, many lost their freedom. Debt slavery allowed creditors to enslave fellow Athenians, turning citizens into property. Some were forced to work the land they once owned. Others were sold abroad, disappearing from their city forever. The ground itself became marked with stone pillars that announced debt and ownership, visible reminders that freedom in Athens was conditional. This growing divide created a city split into hostile camps. On one side stood the wealthy landowners, determined to protect their privileges. On the other stood the poor, angry, desperate, and increasingly willing to revolt. Athens was not facing a minor political disagreement. It was facing the real possibility of civil war. Ancient sources describe a society where trust had collapsed and violence felt inevitable. The legal system only deepened the crisis. Laws were unwritten or deliberately vague, interpreted by aristocratic judges who always ruled in favor of their own class. Justice was not blind, it was inherited. For the average Athenian, there was no reliable way to challenge abuse or exploitation. The idea that law existed to protect everyone equally was still far from reality. Political participation was equally limited. Key offices were monopolized by the elite, and decisions affecting the entire city were made by a narrow group of powerful men. The poor had voices but no influence. They could complain, protest, even threaten rebellion, but the structure of power shut them out completely. What made the situation even more dangerous was memory. Athenians remembered tyranny, they feared it. But they also feared the unchecked arrogance of the aristocracy. Caught between oppression and instability, the city was desperate for a solution that would avoid both revolution and dictatorship. This is the Athens Solon stepped into, not a peaceful city ready for democracy, but a fractured society standing on the edge of collapse. Where freedom was fragile, justice was selective, and survival often depended on wealth rather than citizenship. When Solon's name appears in history, it is often wrapped in praise, as though he single-handedly invented democracy and freed Athens from injustice. But to understand why democracy did not arrive immediately, we must first strip away the legend and meet the real Solon. He was not a revolutionary driven by ideology, nor a champion of the poor alone. Solon was a cautious reformer, shaped by privilege, experience, and fear of chaos as much as by a desire for fairness. Solon was born into an aristocratic family, but not one of the richest or most powerful. This placed him in a rare position. He understood elite culture without being fully protected by it. He was educated, widely traveled, and deeply influenced by poetry, philosophy, and law. Unlike many of his peers, Solon did not see politics as a zero-sum game where one class must destroy another. He believed that extreme inequality endangered the entire city, including the rich. By the time Solon was chosen as archon, Athens was spiraling toward disaster. The poor demanded land redistribution and the cancellation of all debts. The wealthy demanded order and protection of property. Either side could have pushed the city into violent revolution or tyranny. Solon was selected precisely because neither faction fully trusted him, and that mistrust became his greatest political strength. Solon never claimed to represent the people in the way later democratic leaders would. Instead, he positioned himself as a mediator, someone standing between competing forces. His goal was not to overthrow the elite, but to restrain them. At the same time, he did not aim to empower the poor beyond what he believed was safe for the stability of Athens. This balancing act defined every decision he made. What made Solon different from radicals of his time was his belief in law over force. He was convinced that lasting change could not come from violence or sudden upheaval. He feared that revenge politics would simply replace one form of oppression with another. In his own writings, Solon compares himself to a shield held between two armies, absorbing blows from both sides rather than striking back. This philosophy explains why Solon rejected extreme solutions. He refused to confiscate land from the wealthy, even though it would have instantly won popular support. He refused to abolish class distinctions entirely, believing that social hierarchy, if moderated, was preferable to instability. For Solon, reform meant adjustment, not destruction. Solon's personal values also shaped his restraint. He believed deeply in self-control, moderation, and balance, ideals rooted in Greek thought. Power, in his view, was dangerous when concentrated, but equally dangerous when unrestrained. Democracy, as it would later develop, required a level of political trust and civic identity that Solon did not believe Athens yet possessed. Even his decision to write laws rather than rule as a tyrant reveals his mindset. In an era when many leaders seized absolute power to impose reforms, Solon deliberately limited himself. He gave Athens rules, not rulers. But rules alone cannot instantly change power structures, especially when those structures are supported by wealth, tradition, and influence. Solon understood something uncomfortable, that people do not change as quickly as laws do. He believed that forcing full democracy onto a divided and angry city could tear it apart, and so he chose a slower path, one that prioritized survival over transformation. When Solon finally acted, his reforms felt dramatic, even shocking to the people of Athens. For a city accustomed to rule by tradition and elite privilege, the sudden rewriting of laws signaled that something fundamental was shifting. But to understand why democracy did not arrive immediately, we must look closely at what these reforms truly changed, and just as importantly, what they deliberately left untouched. Solon's most famous reform was the cancellation of debts, a policy remembered as the shaking off of burdens. For countless Athenians, this meant liberation in the most literal sense. Citizens who had been enslaved for debt were freed. Those sold abroad were brought home. The stone markers that symbolized debt and ownership were removed from the land. This single act diffused enormous social tension and prevented an immediate uprising, yet this was not a declaration of equality. It was an emergency intervention. Solon erased past debts, but he did not prevent future ones. Wealth still determined economic security, and land ownership remained concentrated in elite hands. The structure that had created inequality was weakened, not dismantled. One of Solon's most lasting changes was the reorganization of Athenian society into 4 property-based classes. Political rights were no longer determined by birth alone, but by wealth. This was revolutionary for its time. A man of modest background could now rise politically if he acquired property, something previously impossible in aristocratic Athens. However, the system also imposed clear limits. Only members of the highest classes could hold the most powerful offices. The poorest citizens, known as the thetes, were excluded from magistracies entirely. They could attend the assembly and participate in debates, but decision-making power remained restricted. Voice did not equal authority. Solon also reformed the legal system by writing laws and displaying them publicly. This was a major step toward fairness. Laws were no longer secret tools of the elite, interpreted however they pleased. Ordinary citizens could now appeal to courts and challenge decisions. Justice became more accessible, but not fully impartial. Perhaps the most overlooked aspect of Solon's reforms was what he did not abolish. The Areopagus Council, dominated by former magistrates from elite families, retained immense influence. This body oversaw laws, morality, and political stability. It acted as a conservative anchor, ensuring that rapid or radical change could be restrained. Solon also introduced the concept of collective responsibility. Citizens were expected to take sides during political crises rather than remain neutral. This encouraged civic engagement but did not redistribute power equally. Participation was encouraged, but leadership remained selective. To many Athenians, these reforms felt contradictory. Freedom expanded, yet inequality persisted. Laws were fairer, yet power still flowed upward. The city was calmer, but far from unified. Solon had opened doors that had long been sealed, but he controlled how wide they could open. These reforms were not designed to create democracy as we understand it today. They were designed to stabilize a fractured city without destroying its social hierarchy. Solon believed that gradual inclusion was safer than sudden empowerment, that order had to come before equality. What emerged from the Solonian reforms was a system in transition, suspended between aristocracy and democracy, where participation increased but control remained limited, and where change was real but carefully restrained. To understand the true limits of Solon's reforms, we must focus not on his actions but on his refusals. History often celebrates what leaders change, yet it is what Solon chose not to change that explains why democracy did not arrive in Athens when his laws were introduced. These decisions were not accidents or oversights. They were deliberate, calculated, and rooted in fear of instability as much as in political philosophy. The most explosive demand from the poor was land redistribution. For generations, land had been swallowed up by elite families, leaving small farmers vulnerable and dependent. Redistributing land would have instantly transformed Athens. It would have weakened aristocratic power and empowered the majority. Solon understood this better than anyone, and he said no. Confiscating land, he believed, would provoke violent backlash and possibly plunge the city into civil war. Stability, in his mind, required respecting property, even when that property was unevenly held. Solon also refused to abolish class distinctions. His property-based system softened aristocratic dominance, but it preserved hierarchy. Wealth still defined political opportunity. This was not a temporary measure. It was a structural decision. Solon believed that leadership required resources, education, and leisure qualities he assumed the poor lacked. In doing so, he limited political equality by design, not by failure. Another critical refusal was Solon's rejection of tyranny. In many Greek cities facing crisis, leaders seized absolute power to force reforms through resistance. Solon was offered this path. He could have ruled as a tyrant, imposed equality, crushed opposition, and reshaped Athens in a single generation. He refused. Absolute power, even for noble purposes, violated his belief in law and restraint. Yet by refusing tyranny, he also surrendered the ability to enforce deeper change. Solon also declined to remain in Athens to oversee his reforms. After writing the laws, he left the city for years, binding Athenians by oath not to change his laws in his absence. This decision is often praised as noble, but it carried consequences. Without Solon's presence, enforcement weakened, old rivalries resurfaced, and elites found ways to adapt without surrendering dominance. Laws alone could not compel democratic behavior. Even within the legal system, Solon imposed limits. While he allowed citizens to appeal to courts, those courts were still influenced by wealth and status. Jury service existed, but the structure favored those with time and resources. Political participation expanded, but economic reality shaped who could truly engage. Perhaps the most revealing refusal was ideological. Solon did not believe the people were ready to rule themselves. He feared impulsive decisions, mob violence, and revenge politics. Democracy required a shared civic identity and trust in institutions, and Athens, divided by resentment and inequality, lacked both. Solon's caution was not cowardice. It was intentional restraint. He believed that sudden democracy could destroy Athens before it could save it. By stopping short, he preserved order but delayed equality. His refusals defined the boundaries of change and shaped the slow, uneven path toward democratic rule. Even after Solon rewrote the laws and relieved the immediate crisis, real power in Athens did not suddenly flow into the hands of the people. It lingered where it had always been, within elite institutions, social networks, and traditions that no single reform could erase. To understand why democracy stalled, we must examine how aristocratic influence survived, adapted, and quietly reshaped the new political order. At the heart of elite power stood the Areopagus Council. This body was composed of former magistrates, almost all of whom came from wealthy families. The Areopagus served as guardian of the laws, overseer of moral conduct, and stabilizing force in times of crisis. While Solon expanded participation elsewhere, he left this council largely untouched. As a result, even when popular assemblies debated policy, the Areopagus retained the authority to guide, restrain, or correct political direction. Magistracies themselves were another gatekeeping mechanism. Although eligibility expanded beyond birthright, wealth remained a requirement. Holding office demanded time, education, and financial security. For poorer citizens, survival took priority over governance. Political equality on paper did not translate into equal access in practice, allowing elite families to dominate leadership generation after generation. Social influence also played a decisive role. Elite Athenians were bound together by marriage, patronage, and shared culture. These networks operated outside formal law but shaped every major decision. A poor citizen might speak in the assembly, but an aristocrat could mobilize allies, resources, and reputation to ensure outcomes aligned with elite interests. The courts, often celebrated as a step toward justice, were similarly affected. Jury service expanded, but influence followed wealth. Rhetorical training, legal knowledge, and the ability to take time off work favored the elite. Law became more accessible, yet still tilted toward those who could navigate it effectively. Religion and tradition further reinforced elite authority. Aristocratic families dominated priesthoods and religious festivals, shaping public values and moral expectations. These roles granted legitimacy beyond politics, embedding elite power in the cultural fabric of Athens. Challenging aristocratic dominance meant challenging tradition itself, a risky move in a society deeply rooted in ancestral customs. Economic control also remained firmly in elite hands. Solon canceled debts, but he did not redistribute land or wealth. Large estates continued to generate influence and dependency. Poor citizens were free, but still economically vulnerable. Without financial independence, political freedom remained limited. Even reform itself became a tool of preservation. By supporting Solon's moderate changes, elites avoided revolution while maintaining control. They adapted to new rules rather than resisting them, ensuring continuity beneath the appearance of transformation. Democracy requires more than laws. It requires a shift in power relationships. In Solon's Athens, institutions changed faster than attitudes, and structures of influence outlasted written reforms. The elite did not lose power, they learned how to share just enough of it to survive. Delaying true democratic rule without openly opposing it, although democracy did not emerge immediately from Solon's reforms. Their true significance becomes clear only when viewed across generations. Solon was not building a finished system. He was reshaping the political imagination of Athens. What he left behind was not equality but possibility. And that possibility would slowly, unevenly, transform the city in ways even Solon may not have fully anticipated. One of Solon's most enduring contributions was the idea that law could stand above individuals. By writing down laws and making them public, he broke the monopoly elites held over justice. This alone altered how Athenians understood authority. Power no longer belonged solely to families or tradition. It could be challenged, appealed, and debated. Later democratic reforms depended entirely on this shift. Solon also normalized participation. Even though political power remained limited, ordinary citizens now had a recognized role in public life. Attending the assembly, serving on juries, and engaging in debate became part of citizenship. These practices trained Athenians to think of themselves not as subjects but as stakeholders in governance. The property-based class system, while unequal, introduced mobility. Status was no longer frozen by birth. Wealth could change, and with it, political opportunity. This concept undermined hereditary aristocracy over time and prepared the ground for broader inclusion. Future reformers would expand on this logic, pushing participation further down the social ladder. Solon's insistence on moderation also shaped Athens' political culture. By rejecting tyranny and radical redistribution, he embedded caution into reform. This made later changes more likely to survive. Democracy in Athens did not arise from sudden revolution, but from incremental expansion, each step building on previous legal foundations. The failures of Solon's system were as instructive as its successes. Continued inequality, elite dominance, and political instability revealed what still needed to change. These tensions fueled later movements and reforms, particularly under Cleisthenes, who would dismantle aristocratic power networks and reorganize political identity itself. Solon also left behind a powerful example of leadership. He showed that authority could be temporary, accountable, and limited by law. In a world where strongmen ruled through force, this model mattered. Later democratic leaders would invoke Solon not as a perfect architect, but as a moral reference point. Most importantly, Solon transformed the question Athenians asked about power. The debate was no longer whether reform was possible, but how far it should go. Democracy became thinkable. Once an idea enters political imagination, it cannot be erased. Solon did not deliver democracy, but he made it unavoidable, embedding change into law, habit, and expectation, ensuring that future generations would push beyond his limits and complete the journey he only began. The mystery of the Solonian reforms is not why democracy failed, but why it took time. Solon stepped into a city fractured by inequality, fear, and the threat of collapse, and he chose restraint over revolution. He freed Athenians from debt slavery, opened participation, and placed law above lineage, yet he also preserved hierarchy, elite institutions, and economic imbalance. These contradictions were not flaws in his vision. They were the limits he believed Athens could endure. Democracy did not arrive immediately because Athens itself was not ready. Power does not vanish the moment laws change. It lingers in wealth, tradition, institutions, and habits of thinking. Solon understood that forcing full equality onto a divided society might destroy it, and so he chose to stabilize first and transform later. What followed proved his importance. Each later reformer worked within the framework Solon created, expanding participation, weakening elite control, and redefining citizenship. Democracy in Athens was not a single invention, but a long process shaped by compromise, conflict, and gradual expansion. Solon's greatest achievement was not what he completed, but what he made possible. By turning authority into law and subjects into participants, he set Athens on a path where democracy was no longer a question of if, but when.